medieval gallows, a forest of the hanged. Beyond the walls of every medieval city, along the dusty roads that wound through the countryside, there stood a sight both dreaded and unforgettable, the gallows field. It was a place of judgment, of terror, and of death. To enter a city, a traveler often had to pass beneath the swaying corpses of criminals, traitors, and outcasts, their bodies left to rot in the wind, their bones picked by crows, their faces unrecognizable save for the horror they inspired. These were not mere executions. They were monuments of warning, messages written in flesh and bone to all who approached. And for centuries, they stood as grim forests of the hanged, rotting reminders that law and power in the medieval world were written in blood. The gallows was more than wood and rope. It was a theater, a stage of death where justice was acted out before the public. When a man or woman was sentenced to hang, it was not carried out in secret. Instead, it was turned into spectacle. Crowds gathered, vendors sold food and drink. Children clambered onto shoulders to glimpse the dying struggle. The condemned would be paraded through the streets, sometimes with a rope already around the neck, forced to carry the very ladder or beam upon which they would die. Their crimes were proclaimed aloud, their names cursed, and then, beneath the open sky, their lives were ended as their bodies jerked and twisted on the rope. Hanging was slow. The drop that broke the neck instantly would not be perfected until later centuries. In the Middle Ages, hanging meant strangulation. The noose tightened, the condemned clawed at the rope, eyes bulging, tongue swelling, feet kicking wildly. The crowd watched as the life was choked from them, a drawn-out death that could take minutes. Sometimes, in crueler cases, the executioner would tug at the victim's legs to hasten the end. Sometimes, families or friends would cling to the body to put them out of their misery. More often, they were left to writhe, their final agony laid bare for all to see. But death was only the beginning. For in the medieval mind, the gallows was not merely a punishment in life, it was a punishment beyond it. The bodies of the condemned were rarely buried. Instead, they were left hanging in the open, suspended on the wooden beams of the gallows or displayed in iron cages called gibbet cages. There they remained for weeks, months, even years, until flesh rotted, bones fell, and the remains scattered across the ground. Travelers could smell the gallows long before they saw them. The air was thick with the stench of decomposition. The wind carried the odor of rot into the city itself, a reminder to every nose that crime carried not only disgrace but eternal humiliation. These fields of the hanged became landmarks. To say one lived beyond the gallows was to mark one's home by the tree of death. To pass them was to confront mortality, sin, and justice. Gallows Hill, Gallows Field, Gibbet Cross, names that still stain maps across Europe today. To peasants, they were cursed places avoided at night. To criminals, they were visions of their likely fate. To rulers, they were symbols of authority, power carved into the landscape itself. The sight of rotting corpses was meant to terrify, but it also fascinated. Chroniclers speak of people traveling miles to witness great executions. When traitors were hanged, drawn, and quartered, their dismembered remains were sent to different towns, nailed above gates, or left on poles. At Tyburn in England, so many were executed over centuries that it was said the ground itself became rich with human fat, and the wooden beams of the gallows reeked with death. Ravens and crows grew fat on human flesh, and travelers would speak of seeing dozens of bodies at once swaying in the wind like grotesque fruit on a tree. In some cities, the gallows stood upon great hills outside the walls, vast wooden structures large enough to hang dozens at once. In Paris, the infamous gibbet of Montfaucon loomed over the city for centuries. Built of stone and timber, with multiple levels of beams, it could display as many as 50 corpses at a time. The rotting dead hung there permanently, their skulls grinning down at the road, their bones clattering in the wind. Montfaucon became a symbol of royal justice, its silhouette visible for miles, its horror etched into the memory of every Parisian. It was a forest of death made of human bodies, a warning carved into the skyline. Imagine the sight. On a hot summer day, flies buzzing in clouds, maggots spilling from eye sockets, blackened flesh peeling from bone, clothes tattered by rain and wind. The gallows was not merely a punishment for the condemned but for their families, forced to see their loved one denied burial, their soul left in limbo. The medieval belief held that without burial, the dead might not rest, their spirits wandering restlessly, their damnation sealed. Thus, the gallows punished not only body and memory but soul itself. Children grew up beneath these sights, their games played in the shadow of death. Merchants passed by, holding cloths to their noses. Priests crossed themselves. Outlaws mocked the dangling corpses, daring the law to catch them next. And in the silence of night, the creak of chains and the soft thud of loosened bones striking the ground haunted the dreams of those who lived nearby. There were stories, of course, tales of the hanged rising in storms, their bodies twitching as if life returned, demons animating the corpses to mock the living. Some believed witches gathered fat from the hanged to use in unholy ointments. Others whispered that crows feeding on traitors carried their wickedness into the fields, spreading curses. It was said that if you looked too long upon a gibbet, the face of the condemned would follow you into your dreams. And yet, despite the terror, there were those who profited from the gallows. Executioners sometimes sold the rope from a hanging as a charm, a grisly relic believed to bring luck or power. Pieces of the clothing of the hanged were stolen as amulets. Some physicians even claimed that the fat of the hanged had healing properties, and black market dealers cut flesh from the corpses to sell in shadowed corners. The line between justice and desecration blurred, the gallows feeding not only the crows but the superstitions of men. Punishments were tailored to the crime. Thieves hanged by the dozen, their corpses left to rot until unrecognizable. Highwaymen displayed at crossroads, their bodies turning in the wind to warn all travelers. Traitors given the most spectacular deaths, disemboweled, beheaded, quartered, their heads nailed above gates, their limbs scattered to distant shires. In all cases, the gallows became an unending reminder that law was merciless and kings ruled not only by sword but by rope. The fear of the gallows was deep and constant. To dream of it was to dream of disgrace, to die not as a warrior or a martyr but as a criminal, denied burial, denied dignity. In the songs and ballads of the age, gallows loomed as both threat and inevitability. Outlaws like Robin Hood sang of escaping the hangman's rope, while peasants joked bitterly that all men, in time, might dance the gallows dance. It was a macabre humor, for the reality was too grim to face without jest. In times of plague, famine, or war, the gallows multiplied. Fields filled with the dead, criminals punished for thefts born of hunger, deserters strung up for fleeing the battlefield, rebels hanged in rows as warnings to others. In the wake of uprisings like the Jacquerie in France or the peasants' revolt in England, gallows groaned under the weight of thousands. Hills turned black with carrion. Villages lived in the shadow of death's harvest. For the rulers, it was necessary terror. For the people, it was hell brought down to earth. And so they remained, these forests of the hanged. Year after year, new bodies joined the old. The wood of the gallows grew slick with rain and fat, the ropes stiff with dried blood. Generations passed, but the gallows stood eternal, timeless monuments of warning. To walk past them was to remember one's place in the order of the world. To disobey law was to swing, to dangle, to rot in public, one's shame eternal. The Middle Ages gave us castles and cathedrals, chivalry and knights, but just as surely, they gave us gallows fields. They were part of the landscape, part of the psyche, carved into the memory of every man, woman, and child who lived in their shadow. They taught fear, obedience, and silence. They silenced dissent, broke rebellion, and crushed the spirit of those who dreamed of freedom. And if you listen closely, even now, where gallows hills still rise above villages, you may hear the whisper of rope in the wind, the creak of wood, the caw of crows. The forest of the hanged may be gone, but its memory endures, a shadow over the past, a reminder that the Middle Ages were not only an age of faith and valor, but of death displayed as spectacle, where justice and horror were one, and the bodies of the condemned swayed forever in the wind.